"She doesn't belong in our strategic planning unit," Colonel Victor Hargrove announced loudly, towering over Lieutenant Maya Chen in the command center at Fort Benton Military Base. His imposing 6'3" frame cast a shadow across her detailed battle maps as she tried to present her analysis. Women like her should stick to logistics or communications, not battlefield strategy. The senior officers in the room exchanged knowing glances as Hargrove dismissively swept Maya's meticulously prepared documents off the table. Someone snickered. For a brief moment, Maya's sleeve shifted slightly, revealing a small pin, an emblem from a prestigious military academy few people recognized. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she took a measured breath. They had just humiliated the wrong strategist. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I wonder where you're watching this story unfold from today. Whatever corner of America you're in, you've probably witnessed someone being underestimated before. Perhaps you're in a bustling metropolis like Chicago, a quiet town in the Rockies. Or maybe you're viewing from the coastal shores of Oregon. Wherever you are, I'm sure you've seen the look of surprise when someone proves their doubters wrong. But rarely does it happen quite like this. Maya Chen had always been a woman of careful words and thoughtful silence. At 34, her slender build and quiet demeanor often led people to overlook her in a room full of commanding military personalities. She lived in a modest apartment on the west side of Fort Benton, the kind with standard-issue furniture and bare walls, except for a single shelf displaying a collection of academic honors and specialized certifications, kept in simple frames. 6 years had passed since she graduated at the top of her class from the Defense Strategic Studies Institute, one of the most exclusive military think tanks in the country. 6 years since she decided to put her theories into practice by joining an active military unit. These days, Maya worked as an intelligence analyst for the 42nd Strategic Response Division, examining patterns in data and developing theoretical battlefield scenarios. Her colleagues respected her attention to detail and methodical approach to complex problems. What they didn't know was that her understanding came not just from textbooks and simulations, but from years of developing revolutionary strategic thinking that military academics were still trying to fully comprehend. Maya had made a deliberate choice to join a frontline unit rather than remain in the academic world of military theory. She wanted to see her ideas tested in realistic scenarios, to prove that new approaches could save lives and resources in modern warfare. The small DSSI pin she sometimes wore on her civilian clothes remained mostly unnoticed, a private reminder of the groundbreaking work she had done before joining this unit. 3 years ago, Maya's mentor, General Eleanor Washington, had passed away after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer. A pioneering strategist herself, Washington had been Maya's inspiration, her advocate, and her shield throughout her academic career. Her absence left a void that Maya struggled to fill. For months after the funeral, Maya would visit the base's simulation center in the quiet hours of early morning, working through complex strategic exercises that she and Washington had developed together. It was her form of connection, of honoring the woman who had taught her that innovation and adaptation were more powerful than blindly following established doctrine. Maya kept Washington's personal challenge coin in her desk drawer, a tangible link to the woman who had taught her that precision thinking under pressure could save more lives than any weapon. The idea to participate in the annual war games came from one of her colleagues, Captain James Rivera, during a late-night analysis session. "You know," he said, studying a complex network diagram Maya had created, "with your systems thinking approach, you'd probably excel in the combined forces exercise next month. It might be a good way to process some of that grief you're still carrying." Maya had smiled politely but dismissed the suggestion initially. The Combined Forces exercise was the military's most prestigious strategic competition, bringing together the best tactical minds from all branches to solve complex, simulated warfare scenarios. Participation was typically reserved for senior officers with battlefield command experience, not intelligence analysts working behind the scenes, but the suggestion lingered in her mind. She began reviewing previous year's scenarios, studying the approaches that had succeeded and failed, slowly building confidence in her unique methodology. After weeks of private preparation, Maya decided it was time to put her name forward as a potential team member. Fort Benton Strategic Command had a storied history in the war games, and selection for their 6-person team was fiercely competitive. It wasn't until her third attempt to join a planning meeting that she encountered Colonel Victor Hargrove, the unit's designated team leader and the commanding officer's most trusted advisor. Hargrove had built an impressive 25-year military career on conventional strategic doctrine. His record in previous war games included 4 first-place finishes and 3 runner-up positions. He had cultivated a reputation as a brilliant, if traditional, strategist, and gathered around himself a team of like-minded officers who deferred to his expertise and reinforced his status. Maya's innovative approach to battlefield dynamics and her questioning of established tactical responses had not gone unnoticed by Hargrove, and not in a positive way. The morning of their first direct confrontation, Maya had arrived early to the command center to prepare some simulation data for review. She wore her standard uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Nothing about her appearance suggesting her exceptional academic background or the revolutionary strategic theories she had developed during her time at the DSSI. Hargrove and his inner circle entered the command center like generals inspecting frontline troops, their confident voices and authoritative energy filling the space. Maya continued her work, focusing on her data analysis and scenario projections, until Hargrove deliberately walked over to her workstation. "What are you doing with classified simulation parameters?" he asked, his voice carrying across the room to ensure others would hear. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Preparing alternative response scenarios for the team's consideration, sir," Maya replied, maintaining her professional composure. Hargrove picked up one of her reports, skimming it with exaggerated skepticism. "Interesting approach for a beginner," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But the Combined Forces exercise isn't a theoretical classroom exercise. We need battle-tested strategies, not academic fantasies." He dropped her report on the table, several pages sliding to the floor. "This isn't the research department, Lieutenant. We develop real-world tactical solutions here." Laughter followed as Maya quietly gathered her scattered documents, feeling the eyes of everyone in the command center following her movements. The humiliation burned, but she maintained her composure, remembering General Washington's advice about picking the right moment to demonstrate your value. "This happens to everyone who challenges the Colonel's strategic doctrine," explained Captain Rivera as they shared lunch in the mess hall later that day. "Either you adopt his playbook or you're sidelined. He's been running the War Games team for 5 years now." The warning did little to prepare Maya for the systematic campaign of marginalization that followed. In the days and weeks that came, she found herself subjected to a deliberate pattern of professional exclusion designed to push her out of the strategic planning unit. It began with the senior officers themselves, many of whom took their professional cues from Colonel Hargrove. When Maya offered input during briefings, her suggestions were either ignored or dismissed with minimal consideration. If she presented data that contradicted the established approach, senior officers would question her methodology or the relevance of her analysis. In the officers' lounge, she overheard comments about her age, her academic background, and her lack of combat experience. The professor trying to teach soldiers how to fight became a running joke. A group of officers who regularly collaborated on tactical assessments would physically reposition themselves when she approached, creating a visible barrier of exclusion. Even those who seemed to recognize the value in her approaches remained silent witnesses, unwilling to challenge the unit's established hierarchy. "Just transfer to another department," one sympathetic captain advised her quietly. "Intelligence analysis would welcome your skills, and you wouldn't face this kind of resistance." Hargrove and his inner circle elevated their campaign to an art form. When Maya submitted her name for consideration for the War Games team, Hargrove used her as an example during the selection committee meeting, publicly dissecting her lack of combat experience and questioning whether theoretical knowledge could translate to battlefield reality. His closest allies created practical obstacles to her work, restricting her access to certain simulation programs, scheduling critical planning sessions when she had mandatory training elsewhere, and assigning her peripheral tasks that kept her away from core strategic development. They nicknamed her the Librarian, despite her being a commissioned officer, and the name caught on throughout the Strategic Command Center. During tactical exercises, Hargrove would assign Maya impossible scenarios with limited resources, setting her up for public failure. "That's your solution?" he would ask loudly when she struggled to make the unworkable parameters function. "Maybe try teaching a classroom of cadets instead of planning missions where lives are at stake." The unit's leadership, influenced by Hargrove's stellar record and close relationship with the base commander, provided no refuge. Maya's first formal request to join the War Games team was denied with a dismissive note about seeking opportunities more aligned with your experience level. The training department frequently scheduled her for basic courses she had already completed, forcing her to file multiple correction requests. During group strategy sessions, facilitators gave her minimal speaking time, focusing instead on the perspectives of those aligned with Hargrove's methodology. The personnel department accidentally omitted her name from the list of officers eligible for the upcoming tactical leadership course, and when she pointed out the error, the manager suggested with thinly veiled contempt that technical specialization might be more your speed and capability set, Lieutenant. The professional isolation extended beyond the base's physical boundaries. When Maya attempted to join online forums for military strategists, her contributions about adaptive response systems were met with skepticism. "Let me guess," wrote one user whose profile showed him standing alongside Colonel Hargrove at an awards ceremony. "You developed this theory last week in your first command post exercise?" Her application to participate in a regional military theory conference was rejected, citing operational needs at base that seemed selectively applied. At a community outreach event where officers presented military careers to college students, organizers assigned Maya to discuss administrative roles rather than strategic planning, despite her expertise. Veterans of multiple combat deployments dismissed her innovative approaches during discussions, though the same ideas would receive consideration when presented by male officers with similar academic but more extensive field experience. The situation reached a new low when a military journal visited Fort Benton for a feature on innovative tactical training. The resulting article, "Theory versus Practice: The Widening Gap in Military Education," included a photo of Maya struggling to explain a complex adaptive system to visibly skeptical senior officers. The piece never mentioned her by name, but used her image as the face of academically trained officers who lacked the practical experience to implement their theoretical knowledge in real-world scenarios. The article circulated widely within military leadership circles, accumulating hundreds of comments on internal discussion boards. Worse still, some of Maya's former professors at the DSS saw the piece, leading to uncomfortable questions about her integration into active military units and whether her theoretical work was proving applicable in practice. Through it all, Maya maintained her professionalism, continuing to develop her strategic models and refine her approaches despite the hostile environment. In private moments, she would hold General Washington's challenge coin and remember her mentor's advice during their most challenging research periods. Let them underestimate you. That's when your ideas can slip past their defenses. She focused on perfecting her methodology, studied historical cases of strategic innovation, and made incremental improvements to her models that went largely unnoticed by those determined to see her fail. Each dismissal became motivation, each obstacle a chance to demonstrate the mental resilience that had once made her the DSSI's most promising theorist. She wasn't fighting for academic recognition anymore. She was fighting for the right to contribute. Meaningful strategic thinking that could ultimately save lives on the battlefield. The daily struggle reminded her of something General Washington had told her years ago. The most dangerous weapon in warfare isn't a new technology, it's a new way of thinking that your opponent doesn't recognize until it's too late. One Thursday evening, after a particularly discouraging planning session where her input had been completely ignored, Maya remained in the empty simulation center long after others had left. She moved through a series of complex strategic scenarios. With methodical precision, her mind clearing of the day's frustrations as she focused solely on optimizing resource allocation and minimizing casualty projections. She didn't notice Base Commander Colonel James Blackwell observing from the doorway until he cleared his throat. "Interesting approach to the Kassan Valley scenario," he said, surprising her with his specific knowledge of the simulation. "Most officers try to secure the northern ridge first, but you're establishing multiple smaller fortified positions instead." Maya nodded, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected engagement from the base's commanding officer. Blackwell stepped further into the room, his usual formal manner softened in the late hour. "You know we're hosting the annual Combined Forces exercise next month," he said, studying her complex deployment pattern on the screen. "First time in 5 years. All the top strategists from every branch will be here." There was something in his tone that Maya couldn't quite identify, a mixture of curiosity and assessment. "I'm aware, sir," she replied, though the prospect of being further sidelined during such a prestigious event held little appeal. Blackwell nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Colonel Hargrove can be intense," he said, choosing his words carefully. "The pressure of maintaining our winning record gets to him. The strategic community can be quite traditional in their thinking. Just so you know, it's not personal." But it had become personal, as Maya discovered the following day when she arrived to find her name on the official War Games team roster, prominently displayed on the command center's main screen. Hargrove stood nearby with his usual entourage, his expression transforming into barely contained anger when he noticed her surprise. "Seems you've been added to the War Games team," he called across the room, drawing attention from everyone present. "Command insists we need an intelligence analyst perspective. Brave move for someone with your limited experience." He approached her workstation, lowering his voice but remaining audible to those nearby. "This isn't a classroom exercise, Lieutenant. These scenarios determine promotions, funding, and ultimately how we fight actual wars. Do not make me look bad or interfere with my strategy. You're here to observe and learn, nothing more." The statement hung in the air, a public challenge that demanded a response. Maya looked him directly in the eyes, something she rarely did with superior officers. "I understand the stakes completely, sir," she said simply, before turning back to her workstation. The exchange sparked a wave of whispered conversations and speculative glances. Hargrove's inner circle doubled down on their campaign in the days that followed, as if determined to break her resolve before the exercise could test their leader's strategic dominance. Rumors circulated that Hargrove had designed specific scenarios to showcase conventional approaches, ensuring newer methodologies would appear ineffective in comparison. Despite the intensified intimidation, Maya continued her preparation with renewed focus. The War Games had given her something concrete to prepare for, a defined goal that harkened back to her days of intensive research at the DSSI, in early morning sessions before her regular duties and late evenings after her shifts. She refined her strategic models and built alternative response frameworks. At home, she reviewed recordings of previous year's exercises, studying the patterns and expectations of the judges and competing teams. When the weekend before the exercise arrived, she made an unplanned video call to her former academic advisor at the DSSI, Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a retired Navy strategist who had helped develop some of the theoretical foundations that Maya had later expanded upon. "This is your moment," Dr. Montgomery told her after hearing about the situation. "Not to prove them wrong, but to prove your ideas right. There's a difference." They spent hours refining Maya's approach to likely scenarios, identifying the blind spots in conventional doctrine that her methodology could address. "Remember," Dr. Montgomery said before ending the call, "innovative strategy isn't about dramatic gestures. It's about seeing connections others miss and having the courage to act on them when the moment comes. This is for you, General Washington," Maya whispered as she organized her notes that night, feeling more centered than she had in months. The Combined Forces exercise began on a crisp autumn Monday, drawing senior officers and strategic specialists from across all military branches to Fort Benton. The sprawling base had been transformed with additional simulation centers, secured briefing rooms, and specialized communication systems to accommodate the prestigious event. Maya arrived early wearing her standard uniform, her hair tied back neatly, no special insignia or accessories to draw attention. She registered quietly at the participant check-in and began reviewing the preliminary briefing materials in a corner, away from the clusters of animated strategists reuniting with colleagues from previous competitions. Hargrove made his entrance 30 minutes later, surrounded by his team, all wearing matching unit patches specially designed for the event. He moved through the gathering like a celebrated general, greeting competitors from other bases with the confident familiarity of a regular champion. Though he never looked directly at Maya, his gaze swept past her location several times as he positioned his team strategically near the main briefing area. The exercise began with Colonel Blackwell welcoming participants and explaining the format. 3 days of increasingly complex strategic challenges, with teams scored on effectiveness, resource efficiency, adaptability, and minimizing simulated casualties. Teams would develop strategic responses to scenarios revealed only at the start of each session, with limited time to formulate and present their approaches. The first day focused on conventional force-on-force scenarios, tank battalions facing off across open terrain, infantry companies securing urban environments, and naval task forces protecting shipping lanes. Hargrove's team performed impressively as expected, presenting textbook solutions executed with precision and confidence. Their years of working together showed in their seamless coordination and unified approach. Maya contributed quietly during their planning sessions, offering analysis of terrain features and suggesting minor adjustments to unit positioning. Hargrove largely ignored her input, occasionally acknowledging a point with minimal integration into the team's overall strategy. By the end of day 1, Fort Benton's team stood in second place, narrowly behind a Marine Corps team from Quantico. "Not bad for having to carry dead weight," one of Hargrove's allies muttered just loudly enough for Maya to hear as they left the simulation center that evening. The second day introduced asymmetric warfare elements, insurgent activities, cyber attacks on command systems, and environmental complications like severe weather and restricted visibility. Here, Maya's background in adaptive systems and pattern recognition began to show value as she identified vulnerability points that conventional approaches missed. During a particularly challenging scenario involving multiple simultaneous insurgent actions, Maya noticed a pattern in the simulated enemy movements that suggested a coordinated effort rather than separate cells. When she attempted to point this out, Hargrove cut her off. "We don't have time for theoretical pattern analysis," he said dismissively. "Stick to the standard counterinsurgency doctrine." The team's performance that day was solid but unexceptional, dropping them to third place as the Naval War College. Team moved into second with an innovative approach to the cyber warfare component. That evening, Maya stayed late, reviewing the day's scenarios and preparing alternative approaches for the final day's challenges, which historically featured the most complex and unexpected elements. As she walked to her car in the deserted parking lot, she encountered Captain Rivera heading to his vehicle. "He's worried," Rivera said without preamble. "Hargrove. I've never seen him this tense before a final day. The Marine and Navy teams are using approaches he hasn't prepared for." Maya nodded, unsurprised by the assessment. "The battlefield is evolving faster than our doctrine," she replied. "That's been my point all along." Rivera hesitated, then added, "Some of us have been reading your papers from the DSSI, the adaptive response framework you developed. It might be exactly what we need tomorrow." "Hargrove would never accept it," Maya said, unlocking her car. "He might," Rivera countered, "if it's the difference between winning and losing." The final day of the exercise dawned with a tension that was palpable as teams gathered for the unveiling of the culminating challenge. Colonel Blackwell took the stage with unusual gravity. "Today's scenario represents what military strategists believe will be the next evolution of warfare," he announced. "A hybrid threat environment combining conventional forces, irregular warfare, unprecedented technological disruption, and information operations, all occurring simultaneously across multiple domains." A murmur spread through the assembled teams as the details appeared on their secure tablets. A scenario far more complex and interconnected than anything presented in previous years. Teams had 4 hours to develop their strategic approach before presenting to the judges. Fort Benton's team gathered in their assigned planning room, the atmosphere heavy with concentration as they studied the multi-layered challenge. For the first hour, Hargrove led them through his standard methodical approach, breaking down the conventional aspects of the scenario and applying established doctrine. But as they progressed deeper into the scenario's complexities, the limitations of linear strategic thinking became increasingly evident. The conventional responses created vulnerability gaps in cyberspace and left information domains completely unaddressed. Resource allocation models that had worked for decades suddenly proved inadequate for simultaneous threats across multiple theaters. 2 hours in, with the team's strategy showing critical weaknesses and the countdown clock steadily advancing, Captain Rivera broke the uncomfortable silence. "Sir," he said, addressing Hargrove directly, "I believe Lieutenant Chen's adaptive response framework might offer a solution to the domain integration problems we're facing." The room fell silent, all eyes moving between Rivera and Colonel Hargrove. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife as Hargrove's face darkened with barely controlled anger. "We don't have time for experimental theories," he snapped, glaring at Rivera before turning his attention to Maya. "This is exactly why analysts should stay in their lanes. We're facing a real-world challenge with real consequences." Maya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. General Washington's voice seemed to whisper in her memory, "When the moment comes to step forward, don't hesitate." "Sir," she said, her voice steadier than she expected, "the scenario we're facing is specifically designed to expose the weaknesses in conventional domain-separated thinking. With respect, we're trying to solve a network problem with linear solutions." She pulled up a diagram on her tablet and projected it onto the main screen. "This isn't about experimental theories. It's about recognizing the battlefield has evolved faster than our doctrine." The diagram showed an intricate web of connections between seemingly disparate elements of the scenario, how a conventional force movement created openings for cyber attacks, how information operations magnified the impact of small-scale kinetic actions, how resource allocation could be optimized across domains rather than within them. "This is what I've been developing," she continued, her confidence growing as she moved into the familiar territory of her expertise. "An adaptive framework that treats the battlefield as a single interconnected system rather than separate domains requiring separate solutions." Major Scott Wilson, the team's most experienced combat veteran, leaned forward with interest. "I've seen something like this in Afghanistan. The most effective operations were the ones that synchronized across multiple domains simultaneously." "Exactly," Maya said, encouraged by the recognition. "Traditional doctrine teaches us to establish dominance in each domain sequentially. But our adversaries have learned to exploit the seams between domains. They attack the connections, not just the individual components." Hargrove remained silent, his expression unreadable as Maya walked the team through her proposed approach. Her framework didn't discard conventional tactics, but integrated them into a more fluid, responsive system that could adapt as the scenario evolved. "We don't have time to completely redesign our strategy," Hargrove finally said, checking the countdown clock showing less than 2 hours remaining. "We don't need to," Maya countered respectfully. "We can use the foundation you've established and overlay this adaptive framework. It gives us the best of both approaches." The next hour passed in intense collaboration as the team cautiously integrated elements of Maya's methodology into their strategy. Hargrove, still skeptical but pragmatic enough to recognize the potential value, allowed the hybrid approach to develop under his supervision. As they finalized their presentation with minutes to spare, Captain Rivera quietly approached Maya. "He's still not happy about this, but he's smart enough to see its potential. Just be prepared for what happens if it fails." Maya nodded, understanding the implicit warning. If their strategy performed poorly, she would bear the full blame for derailing Hargrove's established approach. But if it succeeded, she had no illusions about who would claim credit for the innovation. The presentation phase began with teams delivering their strategic approaches to a panel of senior officers from all service branches. The Marine and Navy teams presented strong, competent strategies that showed innovative thinking within conventional frameworks. Their approaches earned respectful nods from the judges and set a high bar for the remaining teams. When Fort Benton's turn came, Hargrove took the lead as expected, presenting the conventional elements of their strategy with his characteristic confidence and precision. Then, to Maya's surprise, he turned toward her. "Lieutenant Chen will now explain the integration framework that connects these individual domain strategies into a synchronized system," he said, his tone professional but notably lacking enthusiasm. Maya stepped forward, feeling the weight of dozens of senior officers' evaluations as she began explaining her adaptive response framework. She kept her presentation clear and focused, emphasizing practical applications rather than theoretical foundations, showing how their approach anticipated and countered the complex interactions between different threat components. As she spoke, she noticed several judges leaning forward with interest, particularly a 3-star general from the Joint Chiefs of Staff Office who was taking detailed notes. When she finished and returned to her team's position, the judges huddled in extended discussion before calling for the next team. "Not bad," Hargrove said curtly as they left the presentation area. "Let's see if it translates to results." The execution phase followed, with teams operating in simulation centers where they implemented their strategies against the evolving scenario. This was where theory met practice, as unexpected developments and emerging threats tested the adaptability of each team's approach. Fort Benton's hybrid strategy faced its first major test when a simulated electromagnetic pulse disrupted communications across several operational areas simultaneously. Traditional doctrine called for establishing alternate communication channels and securing key infrastructure before resuming operations, a sequential approach that could take precious time. Maya's framework, however, had anticipated this vulnerability. their pre-positioned adaptive elements automatically reconfigured to maintain minimal essential functions while self-healing the network from the periphery inward. The response wasn't perfect, but it maintained operational capability during a period when conventional approaches would have left forces isolated and uncoordinated. Major Wilson, manning the resource allocation station, gave Maya a subtle nod of respect as their simulated forces continued functioning while other teams struggled to re-establish basic command and control. Similar advantages emerged throughout the exercise as their integrated approach anticipated and countered threats that exploited the boundaries between traditional domains. By the midpoint evaluation, Fort Benton had moved into first place, though by a narrow margin. The judges made particular note of their innovative cross-domain integration and resilient network approach, terms that came directly from Maya's methodology. During a brief break, Maya noticed several officers from other teams studying their approach with professional interest. A lieutenant colonel from the Naval War College even approached her directly. "That adaptive framework," he said without preamble. "It looks similar to some concepts we've been developing, but you've taken the integration further than anyone I've seen." "DSSI work?" Maya nodded, surprised at the recognition. "My doctoral project there, yes." "Thought so," he replied, with professional respect. "We cited some of your early papers in our research. Good to see it working in practice." The interaction didn't go unnoticed by Hargrove's inner circle, who exchanged meaningful glances as they observed the growing professional interest in Maya's contribution. For her part, Maya maintained her focus on the exercise, working closely with the team to fine-tune their responses as the scenario continued to evolve. The final phase introduced the most challenging element yet, a coordinated disinformation campaign that created confusion about friendly force locations, leading to potential friendly fire incidents and resource misallocation. Several teams struggled visibly with this component, their conventional approaches lacking effective countermeasures against this non-kinetic threat. Maya's framework, however, included information environment modeling that treated disinformation as another form of terrain to be navigated. Their response incorporated rapid verification protocols and confidence scoring for incoming intelligence, allowing them to maintain operational tempo while filtering out false information. As the exercise clock wound down to its final minutes, Fort Benton's integrated strategy had established a clear lead over other teams. Their simulated forces had secured key objectives with fewer casualties, maintained operational cohesion through multiple disruption attempts, and adapted successfully to each new challenge thrown at them. When the final results were announced that evening at the closing ceremony, Fort Benton had secured first place by the widest margin in the exercise's history. The citation specifically mentioned their revolutionary integrated approach and adaptive cross-domain methodology as defining factors in their success. Colonel Blackwell accepted the trophy with appropriate military decorum, thanking the host staff and competing teams before acknowledging Fort Benton's War Games team members individually. When he reached Maya's name, there was a noticeable murmur among the assembled officers as many connected her contribution to the team's innovative approach. The aftermath of their victory transformed Maya's professional standing almost overnight. Officers who had previously ignored her now sought her input on strategic questions. Invitations arrived for her to speak at military education institutions about adaptive response methodologies. The Strategic Planning Department, which had marginalized her for months, suddenly found reasons to include her in key discussions and decision-making processes. Colonel Hargrove's reaction, however, was more complex. He maintained a professional distance during the public celebrations, neither acknowledging Maya's contribution nor diminishing it. His inner circle, taking their cue from their leader, adopted a similar stance of grudging professional respect without personal warmth. 3 days after the exercise concluded, Maya arrived at her workstation to find a formal notification. She had been selected to lead a new adaptive warfare integration team. REPORTING, directly to Colonel Blackwell. The position came with a promotion to captain and authority to select team members from across multiple departments. As she absorbed this unexpected development, her computer chimed with a message from Colonel Hargrove requesting a meeting in his office. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, Maya made her way to the office she had always associated with professional discomfort and exclusion. Hargrove was alone when she arrived, standing by the window overlooking the base rather than seated behind his imposing desk. He turned as she entered, his expression uncharacteristically thoughtful. "Lieutenant," he began, then corrected himself. "Soon to be Captain Chen, I understand congratulations are in order." "Thank you, sir," Maya replied, maintaining her professional composure. Hargrove gestured for her to sit, then took the chair opposite her rather than his usual position of authority behind the desk. "I've been doing some thinking," he said after a moment, "about the exercise and how our team performed." He paused, clearly finding the conversation difficult. "I've been leading war games teams for a long time. Built my career on a certain approach to strategy. When you have a system that works, that brings consistent success, it becomes difficult to see alternatives." Maya remained silent, allowing him the space to continue his unusual reflection. "Your framework," he continued, "I didn't want to see its value because it challenged fundamental assumptions I've built my career upon. That was unprofessional of me." He finally met her eyes directly. "The results speak for themselves. Your adaptive integration approach worked better than traditional doctrine against the new generation of threats we're facing. That's not easy for me to admit, but it would be a disservice to the military if I let personal pride stand in the way of strategic evolution." Maya considered her response carefully. "The framework doesn't invalidate conventional approaches, sir. It builds upon them, extending their effectiveness into new domains. Your experience and expertise were essential to its successful implementation." Hargrove nodded, seeming to appreciate her diplomatic framing. "Nevertheless, I owe you an apology for how you've been treated in this unit. That too was unprofessional, and beneath the standards I should uphold as a senior officer." The acknowledgement hung between them, unexpected and transformative. After a moment, Hargrove continued in a more practical tone. "Colonel Blackwell has asked me to contribute an experienced officer to your new team. Major Wilson has volunteered. He was particularly impressed with how your framework performed under pressure." Maya nodded, recognizing the significance of this offer. Major Wilson was one of Hargrove's most trusted officers, and his assignment to her team represented a meaningful professional olive branch. "I would welcome his experience, sir," she replied. "Good," Hargrove said, standing to indicate the meeting was concluding. "I expect your team will develop this methodology further. The battlefield continues to evolve, and our doctrine must evolve with it." As Maya turned to leave, Hargrove added, "One more thing, Captain. General Washington would have been proud of what you accomplished." Maya paused at the door, surprised by the personal reference. "You knew her?" "We served together before she moved to the academic side," Hargrove replied. "She always said the next generation of warfare would require a different kind of thinking. Looks like she found the right protege to develop it." The exchange marked the beginning of a professional transformation within Fort Benton's strategic community. Maya's adaptive warfare integration team quickly became a hub for innovative thinking, attracting forward-looking officers from across the base. What began as a small experimental group expanded into an influential center for strategic evolution that military leaders from other bases frequently visited to observe. Major Wilson proved an invaluable addition, providing practical combat experience that helped translate theoretical concepts into battlefield applications. His presence also facilitated a gradual integration between Maya's team and the traditional strategic planning groups that had once excluded her. Colonel Hargrove maintained a professional distance at first, but over time began to engage more directly with the adaptive methodologies Maya's team was developing. His decades of experience provided valuable stress testing for new concepts, identifying potential weaknesses and helping refine applications for field implementation. 6 months after the War Games, Fort Benton hosted a strategic innovation symposium featuring demonstrations of the adaptive warfare framework that had emerged from Maya's initial concepts. The event drew attention from across the military community, with representatives from war colleges, combat commands, and the Pentagon in attendance. Maya led the main presentation, guiding the audience through practical applications of adaptive response methodologies in various battlefield scenarios. Her team, now including officers who had once been part of Hargrove's inner circle, demonstrated the integrated systems approach that had proven so effective in the War Games. To the surprise of many, Colonel Hargrove participated actively in the demonstrations, explaining how traditional doctrine could be enhanced rather than replaced by adaptive frameworks. His endorsement carried significant weight with the more traditional elements of the military leadership in attendance. As the symposium concluded to enthusiastic reviews, a young lieutenant approached Maya with visible nervousness. "Is it true you developed this at the Defense Strategic Studies Institute?" she asked, eyes wide with professional admiration. "That's where it started," Maya acknowledged with a smile. "But what you saw today evolved through practical application and collaboration with experienced officers here." The lieutenant persisted, curious about Maya's journey from theoretical strategist to leader of a cutting-edge military program. "How did you go from academic theory to changing how the entire military approaches modern warfare? That's an incredible transformation." Maya looked around at the diverse team that had formed around her work, at the community that had transitioned from a source of exclusion to a collaborative innovation center. Colonel Hargrove was across the room, deep in conversation with a general from the Pentagon, gesturing toward one of the adaptive framework diagrams with evident professional engagement. "Some battles aren't won through confrontation," she said thoughtfully. "They're won through persistence and proving the value of your ideas when the critical moment arrives." She watched as members of her team explained concepts to visiting officers, their enthusiasm for the new methodology evident in their animated demonstrations. Sometimes the strongest statement isn't forcing others to acknowledge, "You're right," it's creating something so valuable they can't afford to ignore it. Colonel Blackwell approached, accompanied by a 3-star general from the Joint Forces Command. "The general is interested in implementing your framework across all service branches," he said, excitement evident in his voice. "This could be the beginning of a major doctrinal evolution." Maya nodded, appreciating his enthusiasm while maintaining her characteristic pragmatism. Her goals remained focused on developing effective strategies that could save lives and accomplish missions more efficiently, not on personal recognition or institutional disruption. The expansion of her influence was a welcome side effect, not her primary motivation. As General Washington had often reminded her, the best strategic thinkers aren't trying to make a name for themselves. They're trying to solve problems that others don't yet recognize. Later that evening, after the visitors had departed and the base had quieted, Maya found herself alone in the simulation center, running a complex scenario that integrated elements from all domains of modern warfare. The familiar environment felt different now, no longer a place where she struggled for recognition, but a laboratory where new ideas could develop and mature. She had not sought vindication or institutional change when she joined the War Games team. She had simply refused to abandon valuable ideas because they challenged established thinking. The rest had followed naturally, like the cascading effects predicted by her own adaptive systems models. Outside the windows, Fort Benton's lights created patterns across the darkened base, a constellation of military activity and purpose. Maya Anvaya thought about all the people in those buildings, carrying their own unique perspectives and insights. Junior officers with fresh approaches, experienced veterans with practical wisdom, technical specialists with deep domain knowledge. Her story was just one among thousands, notable perhaps only in how it illustrated the military's gradual evolution toward embracing diverse thinking. Tomorrow, someone else's innovative approach would be recognized, someone else's persistence would be rewarded, someone else's unique perspective would find its moment of validation. The quietest voices often carry the most revolutionary ideas. Here in America's military, we sometimes forget that everyone has hidden talents we can't immediately see. The unassuming intelligence analyst might revolutionize military strategy. The quiet logistics officer could transform supply chain operations. The reserved communications specialist might develop the next breakthrough in information warfare. If you were Maya, would you have persisted in the face of such systematic exclusion, or would you have transferred to a more welcoming department? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become part of our Everyday Heroes community, where we celebrate quiet innovation, resilience in the face of resistance, and the unexpected. Victories that transform institutions from within. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Maya's success story quickly transcended the boundaries of Fort Benton. Within weeks of the Strategic Innovation Symposium, her adaptive warfare framework began appearing in military journals and training manuals across all service branches. What had started as one officer's innovative approach was rapidly becoming a cornerstone of modern military thinking. 6 months after the symposium, Maya received an unexpected invitation to present her methodology at the Pentagon to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The significance wasn't lost on her. Methodologies typically took years, sometimes decades, to receive this level of attention from military leadership. As she packed her presentation materials, she found herself reflecting on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this point. The morning of her Pentagon presentation, Maya woke before dawn in her hotel room, reviewing her notes one final time. She had deliberately structured her presentation to honor the conventional strategic foundations, while showcasing how adaptive frameworks could enhance their effectiveness in modern warfare. This approach had proven successful in gaining support from traditional military leaders who might otherwise resist change. As she dressed in her meticulously prepared uniform, Maya's phone chimed with a message from an unexpected source. Colonel Hargrove had sent a simple text. "They're tough but fair. Your framework speaks for itself. Trust your preparation." The brief vote of confidence from her former adversary brought a smile to Maya's face. Their professional relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted during those early days of conflict. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual respect built on shared commitment to military excellence despite their different approaches. The Pentagon's imposing structure loomed large as Maya's taxi approached. Security procedures were extensive, but eventually she found herself being escorted through labyrinthine corridors to a conference room where some of the nation's most senior military leaders awaited her presentation. General Marcus Reynolds, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, greeted her with professional courtesy. "Captain Chen, your work has generated considerable interest. We're particularly intrigued by the casualty reduction projections in multi-domain conflicts." Maya nodded, maintaining her composure despite the intimidating audience. The framework was specifically designed to optimize resource allocation across domains while minimizing force vulnerability. "Sir." As she began her presentation, Maya noticed the general's expressions shift from polite interest to engaged attention. When she demonstrated how her methodology had predicted emerging threat patterns that conventional analysis had missed, several leaned forward, exchanging meaningful glances. The most powerful moment came when she presented simulation data from 6 different combat scenarios, comparing conventional strategic responses with adaptive framework outcomes. The results showed consistent improvements in objective achievement, resource efficiency, and most significantly, dramatic reductions in projected casualties. These aren't theoretical improvements, Maya emphasized, displaying the data clearly for all to see. The adaptive framework doesn't discard traditional doctrine. It enhances it by recognizing the interconnected nature of modern warfare and responding dynamically to those connections. The question session that followed was rigorous but respectful. These were experienced military leaders who had devoted decades to mastering conventional strategic doctrine. Their questions probed the framework's limitations, implementation challenges, and compatibility with existing systems. Maya answered each question directly, acknowledging limitations where they existed and explaining how the framework could be implemented incrementally to complement rather than replace established procedures. Her honesty about the work still needed seemed to resonate more powerfully than exaggerated claims would have. After 2 hours of intense discussion, General Reynolds concluded the session. "Captain Chen, I believe I speak for everyone here when I say your work represents one of the most significant advancements in military strategic thinking we've seen in decades." He glanced around the table, receiving confirming nods from his colleagues. "We'd like to establish a joint adaptive warfare development group with representation from all service branches, and we'd like you to lead it." Maya managed to maintain her professional composure, but the significance of the moment wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just professional validation, it was an opportunity to implement her ideas at a scale that could transform military operations and save countless lives. "I would be honored, sir," she replied simply. As she left the Pentagon that afternoon, Maya found a quiet moment to call Dr. Montgomery, her former advisor at the DSSI. "They're implementing the framework across all service branches," she said, still processing the development herself. "Joint Chiefs approval, full developmental resources." "I'm not surprised," Dr. Montgomery replied warmly. "You didn't just develop a better strategy, Maya. You developed a better way of thinking about strategy. That's much more powerful." The conversation shifted to practical matters, the challenges of establishing a joint service group, the resistance she would inevitably face from traditionalists, the importance of maintaining academic rigor while transitioning to practical implementation. "Remember something important," Dr. Montgomery said before they concluded. "This framework isn't just about military applications. The adaptive systems thinking you've developed has implications for crisis response, disaster management, even public health emergencies. Don't limit your vision to the battlefield." The insight lingered with Maya as she returned to Fort Benton to prepare for her new assignment. Her focus had been so exclusively military that she hadn't fully considered the broader applications of her methodology. The possibility that her work might eventually save lives beyond the battlefield added a new dimension to her sense of purpose. News of Maya's Pentagon success and new appointments spread quickly through Fort Benton. Officers who had once been dismissive now approached her with congratulations and professional questions. Even those who had been active participants in Hargrove's campaign of exclusion found reasons to engage with her work as its importance became undeniable. Colonel Blackwell organized a formal recognition ceremony before her departure, gathering the base's officers to acknowledge her contributions. "Captain Chen's work reminds us of something essential about military innovation," he said to the assembled personnel. "The next breakthrough rarely comes from where we expect it, and often faces resistance precisely because it challenges our most basic assumptions." He presented her with a commendation, officially recognizing her development of the adaptive warfare framework as a significant contribution to national security and military strategic evolution. Maya accepted the recognition with characteristic humility, acknowledging the collaborative environment that had ultimately allowed her ideas to develop and mature. She specifically thanked Major Wilson for his practical insights, Captain Rivera for his early support, and to the surprise of many, Colonel Hargrove for his challenging questions that had strengthened the framework's implementation. As the ceremony concluded, Colonel Hargrove approached her, extending his hand with genuine professional respect. "Washington, D.C. is a different kind of battlefield," he said with a knowing smile. "Political forces can be as challenging as any enemy combatant." "I suspect my experience here was good preparation," Maya replied with subtle humor. Hargrove nodded, acknowledging the truth in her statement. "The Joint Chiefs don't commit resources like this without serious intent. Whatever resistance you faced here will pale compared to the institutional momentum you'll encounter there." His expression became more serious. "But if anyone can navigate it successfully, it's you. Your persistence here demonstrated that." Maya was surprised by the candidness of his assessment, and even more by what it revealed about his evolving perspective. The officer who had once seen her as a threat to established doctrine now recognized the value of her innovative approach. Even as he acknowledged the challenges she would face in implementing it broadly, "Thank you, sir," she replied simply. "That means a great deal coming from you." Her final days at Fort Benton were filled with briefings, knowledge transfers, and preparation for her new role. The adaptive warfare integration team she had established would continue under Major Wilson's leadership, ensuring the ongoing development of her framework at the tactical level while she focused on strategic implementation. The night before her departure, Maya visited the simulation center one last time. The room where she had once practiced alone, hidden from critical eyes, had become the birthplace of a methodology now recognized at the highest levels of military leadership. She ran a simple scenario, the same Caution Valley simulation Colonel Blackwell had observed her working on months earlier, feeling a sense of completion as she optimized the deployment pattern one final time. When she arrived in Washington, D.C. the following week, Maya discovered that General Reynolds had moved with impressive efficiency. Office space had already been allocated in the Pentagon for the Joint Adaptive Warfare Development Group. Initial staffing included representatives from the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Space Force, each selected for their innovative thinking and openness to new methodologies. "We've fast-tracked everything," Reynolds explained during their first official meeting. "The security environment isn't waiting for us to catch up. We need this framework operational across all service branches as quickly as possible." The urgency was both flattering and intimidating. Maya had anticipated a gradual implementation process with extensive testing and refinement. Instead, she found herself leading an accelerated development program with direct reporting lines to the Joint Chiefs and expectations of immediate, tangible results. The pressure might have overwhelmed her earlier in her career, but her experiences at Fort Benton had prepared her for institutional challenges. She established a methodical development schedule, breaking the implementation into manageable phases that would demonstrate incremental value, while building toward comprehensive integration. Her team quickly proved their value, beginning with specialized training programs for strategic planners across all service branches. These programs focused on practical applications rather than theoretical foundations, showing experienced officers how adaptive frameworks could enhance their existing approaches rather than replace them. Resistance emerged, as expected, particularly from senior officers who had built their careers on conventional strategic doctrine. Some dismissed the framework as unproven academic theory. Others acknowledged its potential, but questioned the accelerated implementation timeline. A few actively undermined the program through bureaucratic obstacles and resource constraints. Maya had anticipated these challenges and developed strategies for addressing each form of resistance. For skeptics, she provided concrete simulation data showing the framework's effectiveness. For those concerned about implementation pace, She created flexible adoption pathways that allowed for service-specific modifications. For active resistors, she found allies within their own services who could advocate from positions of established credibility. General Reynolds proved an invaluable supporter, using his authority to clear bureaucratic obstacles and maintain momentum when resistance threatened progress. "I've seen too many good ideas die in the Pentagon's halls," he told Maya during a particularly challenging period. "This one's too important to suffer that fate." 4 months into the program, an unexpected opportunity arose to demonstrate the framework's real-world value. A complex humanitarian crisis was unfolding in Southeast Asia, with natural disasters compounding political instability and creating multi-domain challenges for military response teams. Traditional approaches were struggling to coordinate effectively across the affected regions. Maya's team was asked to develop an adaptive response plan that could integrate humanitarian assistance, security operations, and logistic support across the affected areas. Working around the clock, they created a comprehensive framework that optimized resource allocation while maintaining flexibility to address emerging crises. When implemented by regional command, the results were immediate and significant. Coordination improved dramatically between previously siloed operations. Resource efficiency increased by more than 40%. Most importantly, the framework's emphasis on anticipating cascading effects allowed response teams to prevent several potential secondary crises before they developed. The successful operation generated attention throughout the military and beyond. Congressional leaders with oversight responsibilities took notice. International partners requested briefings on the methodology. Academic institutions began incorporating elements of the framework into their strategic studies programs. For Maya, the most meaningful validation came from field commanders who reported that the framework had allowed them to accomplish their missions more effectively while keeping their personnel safer. This practical impact, measured in lives saved in crises averted, represented the true purpose behind her years of theoretical development and institutional struggle. As the 1-year anniversary of the Joint Adaptive Warfare Development Group approached, Maya was invited to address the graduating class at the Defense Strategic Studies Institute, where her journey had begun. Standing at the podium facing the next generation of military strategists, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. "Innovation isn't about rejecting established wisdom," she told the assembled students. "It's about recognizing when that wisdom needs to evolve to address changing realities. The most powerful new ideas don't demolish foundations, they build upon them in unexpected ways." She shared the story of her time at Fort Benton, not as a tale of personal vindication, but as an illustration of how organizational cultures can both resist and eventually embrace necessary change. The students, many of whom had studied her framework as part of their curriculum, listened with rapt attention to the human story behind the methodology they had learned. "The framework you've studied didn't emerge fully formed," she explained. "It evolved through challenge and resistance, through practical application and collaborative refinement. The questions and criticisms it faced, even when delivered with hostile intent, ultimately strengthened its foundations and exposed weaknesses that needed addressing." As she concluded her address, Maya offered a perspective that she had developed through her journey from excluded analyst to Pentagon program director. "The measure of your ideas won't be how quickly they're accepted, but how effectively they address real problems. Persistence matters more than immediate recognition. And sometimes, the strongest validation comes from those who initially resisted your thinking most strongly." The DSSI director, Dr. Harrison, approached after her speech. "I've been teaching strategic theory for 3 decades, he said thoughtfully, "and I've never seen a methodology move from theoretical proposal to field implementation so quickly. You've created something truly transformative." "It wasn't just me," Maya replied, acknowledging the collaborative nature of the framework's evolution. The theory began here, but it was shaped by practical challenges and improved through contributions from officers with diverse perspectives and experiences. Dr. Harrison nodded appreciatively at her humility. That's precisely why it succeeded where purely academic theories often fail. You bridged the gap between theoretical innovation and practical implementation, the most difficult challenge in strategic development. He gestured toward the departing students. You've given them something invaluable today, not just your methodology, but the understanding that meaningful innovation requires both intellectual courage and practical persistence. Later that evening, Maya received an unexpected email from Colonel Hargrove. He had been selected to lead a specialized combat task force, implementing adaptive framework methodologies in complex operational environments. His message was brief, but meaningful. Your framework is saving lives daily. Those who once resisted your ideas are now their strongest advocates, including me. Thank you for your persistence. The acknowledgement from her former adversary represented a full-circle moment in Maya's professional journey. The officer who had once been the embodiment of institutional resistance had become a practical implementer of the very methodology he had initially dismissed. As she prepared to return to Washington and the ongoing work of expanding the framework's implementation, Maya reflected on the broader lessons of her experience. Innovation rarely followed a straight path. Meaningful change almost always faced resistance, often from those most invested in existing systems. Persistence and adaptation were as essential to institutional evolution as they were to battlefield success. Most importantly, she had learned that transformative ideas succeeded not by overwhelming opposition, but by demonstrating such clear value that former critics became advocates. Her framework hadn't triumphed by defeating conventional wisdom, but by enhancing it, showing how adaptive thinking could make traditional approaches more effective in evolving environments. Back at the Pentagon, Maya found General Reynolds waiting with news that would open yet another chapter in her journey. The adaptive framework's success in military applications had drawn attention from other government agencies facing complex, interconnected challenges. FEMA was interested in applications for disaster response coordination. The CDC saw potential for pandemic management. The State Department recognized value for international crisis stabilization. Your thinking has implications far beyond warfare, Reynolds said, echoing Dr. Montgomery's earlier insight. The principles you've developed for military domains apply to any complex, rapidly evolving situation where resources are limited and coordination is essential. He presented her with a new opportunity, leading an interagency task force that would adapt her framework for civilian crisis response applications. The role would require navigating even more complex institutional boundaries than she had faced within the military, building consensus among agencies with different cultures, priorities, and operational approaches. It won't be easy, Reynolds acknowledged. Each agency has its own established procedures and institutional momentum. The resistance you faced at Fort Benton will seem simple by comparison. Maya considered the challenge thoughtfully. Her work had always been motivated by a desire to develop more effective approaches to complex problems, approaches that could save lives and prevent suffering. The opportunity to extend those benefits beyond military applications represented a natural evolution of her mission. "When do I start?" she asked simply. 2 years after that fateful day when Colonel Hargrove had publicly humiliated her in Fort Benton's command center, Maya found herself briefing the President's cabinet on adaptive crisis response methodologies. Cabinet secretaries from diverse agencies listened attentively as she explained how interconnected thinking could improve government response to everything from natural disasters to public health emergencies. The framework that had once been dismissed as academic theory by military traditionalists was now being implemented across multiple government agencies, with demonstrated results in saving lives and resources during complex crises. The methodology, born from exclusion and resistance, had become a model for institutional innovation and cross-domain integration. As Maya concluded her presentation, the Secretary of Defense, a retired general who had initially been skeptical of her approach, offered perhaps the most meaningful endorsement yet. Captain Chen's framework represents the kind of thinking we need across government, not bound by traditional domain limitations, but recognizing the interconnected nature of modern challenges and responding with appropriate adaptability. The journey from dismissed analyst to cabinet-level advisor had not been easy or straightforward. It had required persistence through systematic exclusion, courage to advocate unpopular ideas, and wisdom to incorporate valid criticisms even when harshly delivered. Most importantly, it had required the patience to allow results to speak for themselves, demonstrating value so clearly that resistance gradually transformed into support. Later that evening, Maya stood on the National Mall, watching the sunset cast long shadows across the monuments to American leadership and innovation. She thought about the countless others throughout history whose ideas had initially faced resistance before eventually transforming their fields, often long after their lifetimes. She had been fortunate. Her framework had found its moment of validation while she could still guide its implementation and evolution. Many innovators throughout history hadn't been so lucky. Their contributions recognized only years or decades after they had faced rejection and marginalization. As darkness fell over Washington, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The framework's civilian applications were just beginning to be explored. Each new implementation revealed both limitations to address and possibilities to develop. The work of innovation was never truly complete, just as her framework predicted about adaptive systems themselves. Her phone chimed with a message from Dr. Montgomery. Saw the cabinet briefing announcement. Remember when you were just trying to get a seat at the planning table? Now you're transforming how government approaches complex problems. Washington would be so proud. Maya smiled at the reference to her mentor. General Washington had taught her that meaningful innovation rarely came from working within established boundaries. The most important strategic insights, she had often said, come from questioning assumptions that everyone else accepts as fixed realities. That lesson had guided Maya through her most challenging moments, the systematic exclusion at Fort Benton, the institutional resistance at the Pentagon, the interagency barriers in Washington. Each obstacle had been overcome not through force or confrontation, but through demonstrating the clear value of thinking differently about interconnected problems. As she walked back toward her apartment, Maya passed young officers and government employees hurrying through the evening, each carrying their own ideas and insights, their own potential contributions to addressing the nation's challenges. How many of them, she wondered, might be carrying transformative ideas that would face resistance simply because they challenged established thinking? Her story was just one among countless tales of innovation in American institutions, notable perhaps only in how quickly resistance had transformed into acceptance. Tomorrow someone else would question an established procedure. Someone else would propose an unexpected solution. Someone else would persist through institutional skepticism to demonstrate the value of thinking differently. The quietest voices in our meetings often carry the most revolutionary ideas. Here in America, we sometimes forget that breakthroughs rarely come from consensus thinking. The unassuming analyst might transform crisis response. The questioning lieutenant could revolutionize battlefield tactics. The persistent researcher might develop solutions to problems we've accepted as unsolvable. If you were Maya, would you have persisted when faced with systematic exclusion? Or would you have adjusted your ideas to fit within established doctrine? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become part of our American innovation community, where we celebrate persistence in the face of resistance, quiet leadership that transforms. institutions, and the unexpected pathways that lead to breakthrough thinking. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers across the nation and around the world. 5 years after Maya Chen first encountered resistance at Fort Benton, her adaptive framework had become standard procedure across military and civilian crisis response agencies. What began as an analyst's innovative approach to battlefield strategy had evolved into a comprehensive methodology for addressing complex, interconnected challenges across multiple domains. The Joint Adaptive Warfare Development Group had expanded into the National Adaptive Response Center, a multi-agency organization that Maya now directed with the rank of major. Under her leadership, the center served as both an implementation hub and an innovation incubator, continuously refining the framework while training personnel from diverse government agencies in its application. On a crisp autumn morning, Maya stood at the window of her office overlooking the Potomac River, reviewing the center's latest performance metrics. Implementation of the adaptive framework had reduced casualty rates in military operations 37%, improved disaster response coordination efficiency by 42%, and shortened crisis resolution timelines across all measured scenarios. But the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture the human impact, the soldiers who returned home safely because of improved tactical coordination, the disaster victims who received timely assistance through optimized resource allocation, the communities spared from cascading crises through anticipatory response measures. Her assistant interrupted her reflection with an unexpected announcement. "Major Chen, the Secretary of Defense is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." Maya turned, surprised by the unscheduled visit from one of the nation's highest-ranking officials. Secretary William Davidson entered with his typical directness, dismissing formalities with a wave of his hand. "I need your input on something urgent," he said without preamble. "The President is meeting with the National Security Council in 2 hours to discuss the situation developing in the FIO, Eastern Mediterranean. It's exactly the kind of multi-domain crisis your framework was designed to address." He handed her a classified briefing document. "The standard playbook isn't working. We need an adaptive approach." Maya quickly reviewed the document, recognizing the complexity of the unfolding situation. What had begun as a regional dispute over maritime resources had escalated to include cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, disinformation campaigns destabilizing local governments, and irregular forces operating in disputed territories, all while conventional military forces maneuvered dangerously close to direct confrontation. This is precisely the type of interconnected crisis traditional domain-separated approaches struggle with, she confirmed, already mentally mapping the system dynamics. Each component amplifies the others in ways that aren't immediately obvious if you're looking at them in isolation. "That's why I'm here," Davidson replied. "I need you at that NSC meeting. The President specifically requested your perspective after seeing how your framework handled the Southeast Asian crisis last year." 2 hours later, Maya found herself in the Situation Room of the White House, surrounded by the nation's top security officials. The gravity of the moment wasn't lost on her. 6 years earlier, she had struggled to have her voice heard in a base command center. Now she was being asked to address a crisis with potential global implications. The National Security Advisor began with a conventional analysis, breaking down the situation into traditional domains: diplomatic, military, economic, and informational, with proposed responses for each. The approach was methodical but treated each domain as a separate challenge requiring separate solutions. When the President turned to Maya, she took a deep breath and activated the room's main display. "With respect to the conventional analysis, this crisis represents a classic example of a network challenge that can't be effectively addressed through domain-separated responses." She displayed an integrated system map showing the connections between seemingly disparate elements of the crisis. What appears to be multiple challenges is actually a single coordinated campaign operating across domains. The maritime dispute is creating a distraction that masks the cyber operations. The disinformation amplifies the impact of limited military movements. Each element is designed to interact with and enhance the others. The room fell silent as senior officials studied the visualization, many seeing for the first time how the pieces fit together into a coherent whole. Maya continued, walking them through an adaptive response framework that integrated diplomatic, military, cyber, and information operations into a synchronized approach. Rather than responding separately to each component, we need a coordinated strategy that recognizes and exploits the same interconnections our adversaries are using, she explained. When properly synchronized, our actions in one domain can magnify our effectiveness in others, just as our adversaries are attempting to do to us. The president leaned forward, clearly engaged by the approach. This is fundamentally different from how we've handled similar situations in the past. What makes you confident it will be more effective? Maya appreciated the direct question. Because we've tested similar approaches in progressively more complex scenarios over the past 5 years, Mr. President, the framework has consistently outperformed conventional responses in both simulations and real-world applications. Most importantly, it's designed to adapt as the situation evolves, rather than following a predetermined script that adversaries can anticipate. After an hour of rigorous questioning and scenario testing, the president made his decision. We'll implement Major Chun's framework. Secretary Davidson, coordinate with all relevant agencies to ensure synchronized execution. I want daily updates on effectiveness and adaptation as the situation evolves. As Maya gathered her materials, after the meeting, the National Security Advisor approached her. That was impressive work, he said with professional respect. Particularly convincing the Joint Chiefs to integrate their operations with State Department and intelligence activities. They're not known for enthusiastic cross-agency coordination. Maya smiled slightly. 5 years ago, many of them were among the strongest skeptics of this approach. Now some are its most effective practitioners. What changed their minds? He asked. Results, she replied simply. When something consistently works better than the alternatives, even the most traditional institutions eventually adopt it. The framework's implementation in the Eastern Mediterranean crisis proved to be its most visible success yet. Within 3 weeks, the coordinated response had de-escalated tensions, neutralized the information campaign, and stabilized the regional situation without a single casualty. International observers marveled at the precision and effectiveness of the American response, particularly how actions across multiple domains had reinforced rather than complicated each other. When Maya returned to the National Adaptive Response Center after the crisis concluded, she found her team celebrating the framework's success. The operation had validated years of development work and demonstrated the methodology's effectiveness at the highest levels of national security decision-making. The Secretary of Defense called, her assistant informed her. He said the President wants to present you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom at next month's ceremony. First time it's been awarded to someone for strategic innovation rather than a specific heroic action. The news left Maya momentarily speechless. The nation's highest civilian honor seemed worlds away from the command center at Fort Benton, where Colonel Hargrove had once publicly humiliated her for suggesting alternative approaches to conventional doctrine. As if summoned by the memory, her phone displayed an incoming call from a familiar name. General Victor Hargrove, promoted twice since their time at Fort Benton, now served as Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, one of the military's most senior positions. Congratulations are in order, I hear, he said when she answered. Presidential Medal of Freedom. Well deserved. Thank you, sir, Maya replied, still processing the news herself. I'm calling about something specific, Hargrove continued. The Army War College is revising its strategic studies curriculum. They want to make your adaptive framework a cornerstone of the program, with case studies from the Eastern Mediterranean. Operation. They've asked me to extend an invitation for you to help design the new curriculum and deliver the opening lectures next semester. The request represented yet another full-circle moment in Maya's journey. The Army War College was the military's most prestigious institution for advanced strategic education, shaping the thinking of officers destined for the highest levels of command. Having her framework become central to their curriculum would ensure its principles influenced military strategy for generations. I'd be honored, she replied. Good, Hargrove said with satisfaction. One more thing. They want to name the new Strategic Adaptation Center after General Eleanor Washington. Seemed fitting, given her role in nurturing the theoretical foundations of your work. Maya felt a wave of emotion at the recognition of her mentor's contribution. She would have been proud to see how far it's come, she said softly. Indeed, Hargrove agreed. Though I suspect she'd be more proud of your persistence in advancing these ideas despite institutional resistance, including from officers like me. The candid acknowledgement hung between them for a moment, before Hargrove continued in a more reflective tone. You know, I've been thinking about our time at Fort Benton, about how strenuously I opposed your methodology. We all defend the approaches we've invested in, Maya replied diplomatically. True, but there's more to it, Hargrove admitted. I saw your ideas as a threat not just to established doctrine, but to my own identity as a strategist. I built my career on mastering a certain approach. Your framework suggested there might be better ways to think about problems, I thought. I understood completely. The confession was unexpected, particularly from an officer not known for introspection or self-criticism. That's a remarkably insightful perspective, sir, Maya observed. Well, I've had 5 years to reflect on it, Hargrove replied with a hint of humor. Watching your framework save lives and resolve crises that conventional approaches struggled with has been educational. After concluding the call, Maya found herself contemplating this latest evolution in her professional journey. The framework that had once been dismissed as impractical academic theory was now being integrated into the military's most advanced strategic education. The officer who had once been her most vocal critic had become an advocate for institutionalizing her approach. Most significantly, her mentor's contribution would be permanently recognized, ensuring that future generations of military leaders would understand the intellectual foundations upon which the adaptive framework had been built. General Washington's belief in the power of innovative strategic thinking would continue to influence military doctrine long after both their careers had ended. The following month, Maya stood in the East Room of the White House as the President presented her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The ceremony included senior officials from across government, military leaders who had implemented her framework in combat operations, and civilian directors who had applied its principles to disaster response and public health emergencies. Major Chun's adaptive framework represents American innovation at its finest, the President said during the presentation. When conventional thinking proved inadequate to address emerging challenges, she developed an entirely new approach, not by discarding established wisdom, but by integrating it into a more flexible and responsive system. He continued, addressing the broader significance of her contribution. The framework's success reminds us that our greatest national security advantage isn't technological superiority or resource abundance. It's our capacity to adapt and innovate in the face of evolving challenges. As Maya accepted the medal, she reflected on the winding path that had brought her to this moment. The framework's journey from rejected theory to national security cornerstone had never been straight or predictable. Its evolution had been shaped by resistance as much as by support, by criticism as much as by validation. Looking out at the assembled dignitaries, She recognized many who had once been skeptics, but now implemented her methodology in their respective domains. Their journey mirrored her own, moving from certainty about established approaches to recognition that complex challenges required new ways of thinking. After the ceremony, Maya found a quiet moment in the White House Rose Garden, away from the celebration continuing inside. The autumn air carried a hint of the approaching winter as she contemplated what would come next in her professional journey. A voice interrupted her reflection. There you are, escaping your own celebration? Dr. Eliza Montgomery, her former academic advisor, approached with a warm smile. Just taking a moment to process everything, Maya replied, embracing her mentor. I didn't expect to see you here, the White House called. Apparently, someone mentioned I'd played a small role in your academic development, Dr. Montgomery said with characteristic modesty. Though I mainly just got out of the way and let you develop your ideas. You did much more than that, Maya corrected her. You recognized potential in an approach that most dismissed as impractical theory. That validation kept me going when institutional resistance was at its strongest. They walked slowly through the garden, discussing the framework's evolution and its expanding applications across government and beyond. Dr. Montgomery listened with evident pride as Maya described new implementations in areas ranging from pandemic response to climate resilience planning. You've achieved something truly rare, Dr. Montgomery observed. Most innovative ideas either remain theoretical or become so diluted during implementation that they lose their transformative potential. Yours has maintained its intellectual integrity while demonstrating practical value across diverse applications. Maya nodded thoughtfully. The resistance it faced actually strengthened its foundations. Every criticism forced me to refine the methodology, address legitimate concerns, and demonstrate value more convincingly. That's often true of the most important innovations, Dr. Montgomery agreed. Easy acceptance usually means an idea isn't challenging fundamental assumptions. Real breakthroughs require overcoming institutional momentum precisely because they force us to rethink established practices. As they completed their circuit of the garden, Dr. Montgomery asked about Maya's next steps. The Presidential Medal of Freedom at 39, curriculum development at the War College, a national center implementing your framework across government. What challenges remain? Maya considered the question seriously. Sustainability, she finally answered. Ensuring the framework continues to evolve rather than becoming a new orthodoxy that resists further innovation. The greatest risk now isn't rejection, but calcification, having the approach become so institutionalized that it stops adapting to new realities. Dr. Montgomery smiled approvingly. That's exactly the right concern. Every successful methodology eventually faces that challenge, becoming the established wisdom that future innovators must struggle against. Their conversation was interrupted by Maya's assistant, apologetically informing her that the Secretary of Defense was requesting her return to the ceremony for photographs with military leadership. As they walked back toward the White House, Dr. Montgomery offered a final observation. You know what impressed me most about your journey? She asked. Not the framework itself, remarkable as it is, but how you navigated the human elements of institutional change. You persisted without becoming bitter, incorporated valid criticism without compromising core principles, and ultimately brought many of your strongest critics along as advocates rather than defeated opponents. The insight resonated deeply with Maya. Throughout her journey, she had focused on demonstrating the value of her ideas rather than winning arguments or vindicating herself personally. That approach had transformed what could have been confrontational into collaborative, creating space for former critics to become supporters without losing face or admitting error. The framework itself taught me that, she replied. Systems adapt most effectively when components work in concert rather than opposition. The same principle applies to institutional change. 2 months later, Maya stood at the podium in the newly inaugurated General Eleanor Washington Center for Adaptive Strategy at the Army War College. Before her sat the next generation of military strategic leaders, officers selected for their potential to shape the future of American defense planning and implementation. The framework you'll be studying wasn't developed in isolation. She began, acknowledging the collaborative nature of innovation. It built upon traditional strategic foundations, incorporated insights from diverse fields ranging from complex systems theory to biological adaptation models, and evolved through rigorous testing and implementation across multiple domains. She shared the story of the framework's journey not as personal vindication, but as illustration of how innovative ideas navigate institutional environments. The students, many of whom had already encountered the methodology in field applications, listened intently to the human story behind the strategic evolution they were witnessing. The resistance this framework initially faced wasn't irrational. She explained, deliberately validating rather than dismissing traditional perspectives. Established doctrines become established precisely because they've proven effective in past contexts. Skepticism toward unproven alternatives reflects appropriate caution, not mere stubbornness. She continued, emphasizing a point central to her understanding of institutional innovation. The measure of a new idea isn't how quickly it's embraced, but how effectively it addresses emerging challenges that existing approaches struggle with. Meaningful innovation doesn't seek to replace established wisdom entirely. It builds upon foundations while adapting to changing realities. As she concluded her address, Maya offered the perspective that had guided her through both triumph and adversity. Your effectiveness as strategic leaders won't be determined by adhering to any single doctrine, even this one. It will come from your ability to recognize when realities are changing faster than our mental models, and your courage to develop new approaches when existing ones prove inadequate. After the lecture, Maya met with the War College's commandant, Lieutenant General Rebecca Hayes, to discuss the curriculum development process. "Your opening lecture set exactly the right tone," Hayes observed. "Respectful of tradition while emphasizing the necessity of evolution. That balance seems essential," Maya replied. "We need to prepare these officers for challenges we can't yet imagine. That requires both mastery of established principles and comfort with developing new approaches when circumstances demand." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "The military has always had an uncomfortable relationship with innovation. We simultaneously pride ourselves on adaptability while often resisting fundamental changes to doctrine or organization. It's a natural tension in any institution," Maya acknowledged. "Stability and reliability are virtues in most operational contexts, but they can become vulnerabilities when the environment changes faster than our doctrine." Their discussion was interrupted by an aide informing them that the Secretary of Defense was calling with an urgent matter. When Maya took the call in Hayes's office, she found herself listening to a situation briefing on an emerging crisis that defied CONVENTIONAL categorization, a complex intersection of cyber threats, infrastructure vulnerabilities, non-state actors, and great power competition. "We need your team at the Pentagon immediately," Secretary Davidson concluded. "This situation has elements we haven't encountered in this combination before. The standard playbooks aren't sufficient." As Maya ended the call, General Hayes raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Another crisis requiring adaptive approaches?" "A new variation we haven't seen before," Maya confirmed. "The work is never really finished. Each new challenge reveals limitations in existing frameworks and opportunities for further evolution. Will you be able to continue the curriculum development with this crisis emerging?" Hayes asked practically. Maya considered the question thoughtfully. "Actually, this presents a unique opportunity. With appropriate security protocols, we could involve your senior students in developing response options. real-time application of the principles they're learning with proper supervision. Hayes's eyes widened at the suggestion. That would be unprecedented, but potentially invaluable for their development as strategic thinkers. Adaptation happens at the edge of established practice, Maya replied with a smile. Seems appropriate for a center named after Eleanor Washington. She always believed the best education came from applying theory to emerging challenges rather than historical scenarios. Later that day, as Maya briefed a select group of War College students on the developing situation, she recognized the continuing evolution of her professional journey. The analyst once excluded from strategic planning was now leading the nation's response to emerging security challenges, while simultaneously training the next generation of strategic thinkers. The framework that had begun as a theoretical alternative to conventional doctrine had become a living methodology, continuously evolving through application to new challenges. Most importantly, the institutional resistance that had once threatened to silence innovative thinking had transformed into a collaborative ecosystem, where new ideas could be tested, refined, and implemented. As the students engaged with the complex scenario, offering insights that even experienced officials had missed, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The true measure of her framework's success wasn't the Presidential Medal of Freedom or institutional adoption. It was this next generation of leaders approaching complex problems with adaptive thinking as their starting point rather than a reluctantly accepted alternative. The quietest voices in our institutions often carry the most transformative ideas. Here in America, we sometimes forget that progress rarely comes from consensus thinking. The questioning analyst might revolutionize national security. The persistent researcher could transform disaster response. The innovative officer might develop approaches that save countless lives across multiple domains. If you were in Maya's position, how would you balance respecting established wisdom with pushing for necessary innovation? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become part of our American Innovators community, where we celebrate the persistent change makers who transform our institutions from within, the quiet leaders who see connections others miss, and the courageous thinkers who help America adapt to emerging challenges. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers across the nation and around the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.